This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
The biggest icon in podcasting.
Welcome in, everybody, to this week's episode of Doc and Jock. Looking forward to this week's podcast as we keep trekking toward episode 500. Lots to get into, looking at everything going on with the Detroit Lions now as they enter the offseason. It's a big one with expectations, with a bunch of high morale. You got big-time personalities potentially picking the Lions to be Super Bowl contenders. We got to look at maybe some factors that might preclude them from having the necessary success that we all potentially are starting to see. And then to finish the podcast, got to talk about the Red Wings and some of the moves that they've made, some head-scratching moves. A look at a team that kind of has been playing up and down, hasn't been able to put together consistency in a recent stretch. Joining me, as always, my guy Adam, the Jock Strozinski. What's up, cuz? What's happening? Can't wait to break it all down. It was a crazy week of playoff football, too.
It absolutely was. And if you're a Lions fan, I feel like you should maybe be a little bit frustrated, maybe a little bit annoyed, but on the back end, have a little bit of optimism after watching this past weekend's games. Because I feel like if the Detroit Lions were in any of these games, they would have a legit shot to win, I want to say 95% of these games. There was one game where I don't think they would have won it. I think they would have came up a little bit short, but every other game, I think this team would have had a fighting chance to walk away with a W on both sides, whether it's the AFC or whether it was the NFC. So if you're a Lions fan, there's a whole lot of good out there that I think we're kind of pushing towards next season, and we're hoping some of this momentum, some of these good vibes do carry over. But I think we got to kind of start to kind of delve into a little bit of what's going on with this team and kind of where it's headed. So last week, and more recently than that, Brad Holmes has kind of addressed the Lions and possibly some of his own guys hitting free agency. And it got us to thinking who they should prioritize and possibly why they should prioritize that person. And this team's got quite a few unrestricted free agents coming up. They've got quite a few guys who are going to be hitting the open market, but you can only pick one. Is there one guy that you think is the straw that stirs the drink, or one guy that you think makes such an impactful difference as an unrestricted Lions free agent that you would bring back?
See, this is crazy because when we decided to look at this topic, obviously most of the sites, most of the Lions coverage will now be centered on which free agents the Lions should bring back. Brad Holmes obviously has clearly established, and we'll take a look at what he had to say in regards to free agency. He's clearly established that they like their own free agents. They know the kind of player that they like. They like gritty guys that can battle through adversity, that can handle whatever comes their way and rebound, that can handle a tough loss and bounce back the next week and go out on the road against the Packers and handle business. And sometimes maybe even at the expense of talent. But here's the thing in regards to when you establish yourself, in my mind, as a decent talent evaluator, I don't prioritize any of them. I don't think if Jamal Williams or DJ Chark was not on this team, that in 2023 it would be a failure. Because I believe then that the player that would replace him would have similar traits. And this is the dream that you and I, or at least I, have been spewing out through these microphones over the past 10 years. What made the Patriots successful? They were willing to cut Richard Seymour. They cut guys. And you were like, what? How could they? Because they operated in a system. This is the player we want. This is the player that we desire. You fit when we need you, and when we don't, you're cut. So it's going to depend a little bit on the asking price. If DJ Chark comes in and is like, I'm not taking a pay cut, or I'm not going to be willing to flex, then he's going to be gone. If Jamal Williams, which this is the tough part about loyalty and agents, because I'm always of the opinion, I'd love to be an agent. I'd be like, Brad, this man produced 17 freaking touchdowns. We're going to need 4 years and $25 million, 20 guaranteed, minimum. Nope. Okay, I'll find somebody that will get it. And that's where you look at it, because the man, Jamal Williams, has only made $10 million in his entire career. His entire career. He signed, the Lions got max value out of that deal. Now, Brad Holmes is going to be like, look, dude's getting older. We expect that his production is going to go down. We expect that this is a product of the offensive line. So we're going to offer another 2 years, and maybe we'll go up to $12 million. And maybe we'll guarantee half of it, maybe 6 to 8. And this is where the fun negotiating starts. But if you're Brad Holmes, you're fully confident that we don't need him. So for me, I don't prioritize really any of them. But if you're asking which guys are great for glue, great for what we can expect from them, I think one is Jamal Williams, because you now have a true red zone threat. And the second would probably be Isaiah Buggs and John Kaminsky, because the interior of the defensive line is taking a step forward. And then I'd rank fourth DJ Chark, because you got Jameson Williams in the background and you could potentially draft another party. So when you're a talent evaluator, you got to make these tough decisions. And I can't wait, because I know they're coming. I think they made a tough one in regards to a couple of the practice squad guys that were hurt and eventually didn't get futures deals. But now we get to see. This is the joy of paying attention to a general manager. What kind of flow, who takes the hometown discount, who's willing to play ball, and who offers, who comes to the table. Because there's 31 other teams that have stupid-ass general managers that'll be like, Jamal Williams, you'll get a 5-year deal, $35 million, 38 potential, and then 30 guaranteed. So we'll see if Jamal Williams loves Detroit, because I'm certain there's got to be one team that's going to offer him $25 million plus. So I would rank Jamal number one, because he's a great personality. He works hard. He fits what you need. But I think you can get that. Certainly not 17 touchdowns, but you can get 12 touchdowns with that offensive line, with a grinder of another veteran, maybe at a cheaper cost. So I would rank Jamal Williams my top free agent priority right now. That's on the Lions roster.
See, I wasn't expecting that. I didn't think you were going to go that direction, but that's my number one. And I really liked how you kind of laid out your list with John Kaminsky making it, Isaiah Buggs making it, because those were my other two guys. Because if you look at the defensive side of the ball, defense needs help, right? Defense was really decent down the back end stretch of the season. After they got rid of Aubrey Pleasant, defense really stepped up. It was like a top 10 defense down the stretch of the season. But that being said, you look at those defensive players, can you get that talent somewhere else? Can you get guys who are maybe a little bit more impactful, and maybe it all kind of works out? It really does feel like this team is developing a system both on the defensive side and the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, hopefully, we've got some offensive coordinators that we hope stick around to kind of continue to develop that system. But for me, it would be Jamal Williams. Jamal Williams would be the guy, because offensively, he seems like he is the guy who keeps it all together. He's the guy who pulls everybody in the direction they need to go. He seems like he's a guy when DeAndre Swift isn't performing the way you need DeAndre Swift to perform, or if DeAndre Swift is in his own head, he's the guy who's kind of bailing you out. He's over there playing counselor to DeAndre Swift. He's the guy who's over there taking the rock and scoring touchdowns. It was a formidable 1-2 punch with DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams. On top of that, a ton of personality. He is a fan favorite. He has ingratiated himself with the fans. That's fantastic. But really, when you break it down, it comes down to what is he going to cost you? How much is he going to cost you? You got to remember, unless you are basically a top 5 running back, you don't necessarily cost a ton of money. And this is a guy who he splits the backfield, splits the carries. Yeah, he had a really good season where he had 17 touchdowns. That's awesome. If you go to, I believe it's a spot track, they're saying his annual salary should be $4.1 million for the next season. I think that's a little bit too low. I don't think that's what it really should be. I think it'd probably be something closer to maybe $5 or $6 million. If you're going to spend over $5 or $6 million, at that point, I'm going to have to maybe second guess this, maybe take a step back and look at it, because could we be allocating those funds differently to a different guy who is just as good of a glue guy, who's just as productive as you? Is this an area where we can take that money and maybe we take a little bit of a hit in the running back room and put it somewhere else to help make this team better? I don't know. I am comfortable with Jamal Williams, giving him 3 years at $5 million. So $15 million out the door. I'm willing to go up to maybe 16, so a little bit over. But that was my guy. And it was more just because he seemed to become the face of the team when they were playing, right? When he was on the field, he was the face. He was the guy that everybody was talking about, especially after that game against Green Bay. Everybody talked about him for seemingly the next 10 days. It's absolutely crazy. But Jamal Williams was my guy, followed very closely by, I would say, Isaiah Buggs, because what he did in the middle of that defense was awesome, especially later in the season. And then John Kaminsky, who all these guys, which I think is the most fantastic part about all of this, all of these guys have gone to management and have said, we want to come back. You want to talk about changing the culture. That right there shows the culture here has changed. When before you would have guys who were looking for the first bus ticket out of town, you've got guys who are hitting free agency and they're like, please bring me back. I want to come back. I want to be part of this team. You're doing it right. You're building it right. You can look at Josh Dobbs, who ended up coming to this team, was here for basically a week. He had a sip of coffee, had a donut, and then next thing you know, he's going down to Tennessee to start playoff games for them. He had come out in interviews and said, they're doing it right there. Like, they know what they're doing. They're laying the groundwork. They have it going in the right direction. So cultural change wise, that's another reason I'd like to bring Jamal Williams back. And I think with this coaching staff, they've got it going in the right direction. They really do have it going in the right direction. How much do you think that culture, that shift, this belief in Dan Campbell, this belief in Brad Holmes, how much do you think that is going to impact what some of these guys are willing to take? A guy like a Jamal Williams, a guy like John Kaminsky, a guy like Isaiah Buggs, are they willing to, at this point in their career, possibly take a few dollars less to stay here with this team?
Yeah, it's relative. It's relative. I mean, listen, I understand, look, dollars and cents in regards to like a few $100,000. I think Buggs, Kaminsky, they're not going to break the bank. Teams don't just go, oh, I'm going to offer Isaiah Buggs 5 years and $40 million. Those positions tend to be of the variety where you can negotiate reasonable deals where it's going to be within a couple $100,000. The problem is going to lie in terms of skill players like DJ Chark and Jamal Williams. Jamal Williams is going to get, I believe, a reasonable offer, and it's going to be his decision whether he decides to take a little bit less to be here in Detroit. And that's the issue, is I think that Brad Holmes will give him a reasonable deal. That is right, about $5-6 million a year, but it's going to depend on years too. If he takes 2 years with an option for 3, then maybe. But if another team, here's the thing, this is the joy of free agency. Another team, and when you negotiate and you have a good agent, then Jamal Williams probably could get 3 to 4 years guaranteed at maybe $7 million, and could be in the neighborhood of $25 to $35 million based on the year that he had. Now, remember too that you have teams that are at different positions. The Lions are now in that position where they're going from, perennial basement dwellers to playoff contenders. There's other teams that are playoff contenders that need that final piece, that might just say, you know what, now that we can get a red zone threat right there with a decent offensive line, we're willing to commit that level of resources, maybe a Denver Broncos team or a team out there out west, or a team that's close, maybe even the Patriots who have, dollars, who had dollars willing to spend. They might make a ridiculous offer even to try and drive up the price as a competitive disadvantage for the Lions, because there's only so many dollars that you can have. And people saw, what's the last vision that the whole country saw is Jamal Williams just out there saying, I'm a dog, and having 2 touchdowns and playing at a high level. That was seen by not just football fans, scouts saw that too. And that was a little bit, in my mind, marketing for himself, saying that, hey, we got team, and even though I'm all here babbling and crying, I'm a dog. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to do some things. So in my mind, I just love what Jamal Williams did for himself, because I believe that he's going to get a fair offer. He's going to get 1 or 2 offers that could test the Lions. And I do want to see, it's a great question when you look at it, but if you're a player, other players don't want you to stay and take less money because it drives down the market. So that's why quarterbacks have been going for, just when we started this podcast, there wasn't that many $20 million quarterbacks. Now it went exponentially over the course of 500 podcast episodes. It went up to 50 million for one player. And it's crazy to see those positions. And what are the positions that people like? Running back, quarterback, and wide receiver. So I think G.J. Chark probably odds on favorite to come back because of his injury history. Might preclude another team from making that long-term investment. Jamal Williams is going to be a problem. That's going to be a potential problem to see if he's willing to take that hometown deal. I think he talks a nice game, but when the offer comes, let's see if he decides to stay. But I would love it if the Lions got to run it back one more time with a large chunk of this group. But you still need more talent. You need one. I don't think you need 2 or 3 or 4 high-end defensive players. You just need one. So I like their strategy. They're developing players. They have a bunch of young players that can do some things. The draft is going to fill the pipeline. They just need 1 or 2 players. I was disappointed because it was like right off the bat, the Ravens, and I guess, when you're shopping, you sometimes put the blinders on, and you didn't think that, the Ravens would pony up that quickly. You thought maybe that they would also see, but you realize they weren't going to trade that much capital to get Roquan Smith and then give him up. They were like, boop, locked him up. I was like, no, that was my number 1 target. I was like, shit. I was like, now I got to actually look at the other linebackers out there. It's not that great as compared to the draft. So
this is the problem with the Ravens, though.
Yeah.
If you're a Ravens fan, there has to be some concern here because
Yeah.
you just paid Roquan Smith a
Yes.
buttload of money, and now there's talks about franchising Lamar Jackson.
Yes, problems
So,
are coming.
there's more money, and that's all guaranteed. So, the cap number is absolutely shrinking over there in Baltimore. So, I think if you compare this to what Dan Campbell is doing, I think Dan Campbell has it right because it really feels like they have a lot of flexibility. They have some money to go out and spend in free agency. These weird, we call them a 1-year prove-it deal. These weird little 1-year prove-it deals that he keeps bringing guys in on. It's allowing you the ability to kind of overhaul a roster, still remain competitive, and be able to go out and when he feels, I think all of us kind of feel, all right, the time is now. Let's push the pedal to the floor and let's go do something. Let's go get some guys. When he feels it's time, he can actually go ahead and do that. Like I said, we all feel this way because this was a team that basically won the division. They went 5-1. Minnesota was second with going 4-2. This was a team who was basically 5 minutes away from securing a playoff spot if things went their way with the Seattle game. This was a team that down the stretch of the season played some of its best football, going 8-2 and really wrecking shop for a lot of people and having a very potent offense and having a defense that played 180 degrees different those last 10 games than they did the previous 7 games. So I think it's one of those things where if you're a Detroit Lions fan, you compare it to, say, what Baltimore's got going on. Yeah, Baltimore is pretty situated, and it seems like they always make the playoffs, and they have their quarterback, and they're adding pieces to their defense, but they don't have a lot of flexibility, and they don't necessarily have doesn't feel like they have the ability to do things for the long term, whereas Detroit feels like it's in a little bit of a different boat.
Yeah, it's so good. Free agency talk, the draft. Do you think there's one player in free agency from another team that just appeals to you? I mean, there's rumors going around. I know you see it. I don't think the Jalen Ramsey talk is I think it's just someone that just threw it out there and it gained traction. I don't see the Lions, because you have Kirby Joseph, you have Tracy Walker returning. I don't see you going out and making a big splash via trade to get Jalen Ramsey. I know he was with the Rams. I know it's sexy, but I think you can develop your own and get cheaper talent in the draft. I think you want to kind of shore up a lot more positions at linebacker, interior of the defensive line, cornerback, outside of safety. I think you're good at safety with what you have. There's nobody outside of that. Maybe a backup quarterback like a Sam Darnold, Tyler Heineke, that you could maybe get $10 million for. But I don't see anybody right now outside of Roquan Smith, to me, that indicated we must have him on the Lions, because you're gonna get potentially maybe your own free agents with the draft, 10 players that you probably like. I just think you need 1 or 2 that you target at different spots, maybe backup, linebacker, cornerback, that if you can get a veteran at a reasonable price, I think you're fine. But right now, as we sit, I'm not clamoring for anybody at a super high price.
Yeah, there's really nobody out there. Just kind of looking through a list of available guys. It's really weird because a lot of the bigger name, more productive players, they're a little bit older.
Yes.
And this team doesn't feel and doesn't seem like it wants to go in that direction. It seems like this team wants to remain pretty young. Seems like they want to get guys on deals where they're going to kind of grow into that deal. Here, we're going to give you some money because this is what we think you're going to do in the future. Not basically paying for what somebody has already done, which I feel is the right way to do it, right? It's that way you're not saddled with a similar contract to what you got with Miguel Cabrera, where he ended up getting his massive deal because he had a Triple Crown season. After that, he's never been able to put numbers up like that ever again. So you've been sitting on a bad deal for years now. This team doesn't want to do that. They don't want to go in that direction. And I think that's fantastic. At least it feels like they don't want to go in that direction. So looking at a list of free agents, there really isn't anybody out there that I'm like, oh, this is a must-have. If you can go out there and get a guy who's going to be productive and it's a respectable deal, I'm all about it. I'm cool with it. But there's really nobody out there right now where I'm like, oh, you got to go get this guy. This guy's a must-have. There's no one out there. Look, let me put it like this. Sheldon Rankins looks like he's going to become available. This is a guy who's going to be 29 next year when the season starts. If you are looking for guys, and I think we both agree, defensive tackle needs to be strengthened a little bit, needs to be a little bit better here. This is a guy who can come in and he could possibly make some noise. Obviously, he deals with some injuries, but again, he's 29. The magic number in football is 30. After 30, you start to see a little bit of a production swing with certain position groups. Specifically, cornerback. You generally want to stay away from cornerbacks that are hitting the 30 age mark. Running backs, be a little bit nervous when they hit 30 because of all the wear and tear. Defensive tackle. Defensive tackle is one where I think after about 32, you've kind of peaked and you start to go down. So if Sheldon Rankins comes in at 29, is he going to be willing to take a 3-year deal? I don't know if he will. He probably wants a 5-year deal. And he's a guy who's earning $5.5 million right now. His market value is probably going to be somewhere north of near $10 million, maybe a little bit less. Defensive tackles obviously get paid a little bit less than edge rushers, but that's one of those things that you would have to look at. And I don't know if he's necessarily a fit either, like a cultural fit for this team. So there's a lot of things to kind of wade through into kind of make a decision on. I don't know, with all the money that the Detroit Lions have, I don't know if they're going to be that active in free agency. Because I don't know if there's a fit out there. So I think this team does start by addressing some of their own guys, taking care of a lot of the guys that are here, and a lot of guys that they know what the production's going to be and know how they fit into that locker room. I've never seen a team so cohesive where like I've talked about it before with you, where what happens in the locker room can really help breed success. Like if everybody's on the same page in the locker room, you can really have a much better team, a much better season, even though you don't have all the talents in the world. And this team, we buried this team a season ago because they brought in all of their own free agents again. And we were like, there's just no talent here. They're just like, there's guys who did some stuff, who popped a little bit, but the talent level is so low. Like, what are we doing? They should be going out getting other guys. They've got money. They go spend it. What are they doing? And you turn around and you look at what they were able to get out of these guys. Like, they are squeezing every last bit of talent, potential, juice, whatever word you want to use. They are squeezing it out of these guys, and they're doing it on respectable deals, which is fantastic. And I think it will kind of continue because I just don't see a big name guy out there that you're like, you got to have that guy. That's the guy who you got to bring in. I just don't see it. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how free agency ends up playing out. But after watching what took place this weekend with the playoffs, you had teams like the Jags, who the Lions beat. You had a team like the Bills, who the Lions were neck and neck with on Thanksgiving. You had a team like the Giants, who the Lions destroyed. They scrapped out wins. You had other teams like the Vikings, the Seahawks, the Dolphins, who absolutely crumbled. Do you believe the Lions right now have the foundation to make a playoff run with the pieces that they currently have in place? And you can even project who they might bring in and what they might do. But with the pieces that they have, do you think the foundation has been laid for this team to make playoff runs, plural, not one, not get lucky and slip in next year, but actually put together consecutive shots at making a Super Bowl? Do you think this team has it right now?
Yeah, because you saw it late in the year. They played playoff football, 8-2. They grinded it out. They beat the team that they were supposed to beat. So what I fear, obviously being a Lions fan, is that they have a situation that happened to the Chargers where they're playing great, up 27-0, something happens, and boom, you're on the road and the other team gets momentum and takes it over. Or something happens where you have a great year, which they're poised to in 2023, and you're the Vikings, and another team comes in super hungry has something of an external nature of an injury or a motivating factor, and there's a tidal wave of support, and they come and sweep you or do something like that, something fluky happening. But, bro, they're building through the trenches. They have a solid offensive line. They have young talent that can pressure the quarterback. Now you got to shore up linebacker, cornerback, which I think they will in the draft or free agency. The big question mark is going to be quarterback. Can you go to Chicago potentially if it's a divisional game on the road in a cold weather environment, or you go to a place that's colder weather? Can you go to New York should you end up 10-7 and the Giants are division winners? Can you go freeze in January and handle business? That's the question. Jared Goff maybe can be that guy, but you have more weapons. You have Jamison Williams, who's a top-end threat, which all good teams have. You have a great offensive line, which can potentially get you in the door in terms of conversation of having a running game. You need better running backs. I think DeAndre Swift is a nice quarterback if he's healthy. Jamal Williams, is obviously what he is. He has the potential, but not game in, game out to be the guy that can get you, 50-yard runs and explosive runs. You can upgrade that position. So I see this team having the framework of sustainability, absolutely. And this is what Brad Holmes has instilled when you see the likes of a James Houston coming off the practice squad. Because he wasn't even on the roster, wasn't on the active roster. He was practicing, comes in, boom, that means development's there. That means you can take guys that you pick up on the street and they can come in and maybe do some things. So I'm curious to see what kind of secondary player Brad Holmes likes. Obviously, the first one, Kirby Joseph, very nice pickup. Ball hawk, loves the football and made plays at key moments. That's nice. That's a nice addition. Chase Lucas, obviously 7th rounder. You can't really judge too much because those picks are very much of a lower investment. So I want to see what kind of cornerback does he decide to take maybe in a higher round or who develops on this roster. So I love it. I think this is a playoff team. That team, in my mind, this weekend would have competed against every single team but the Niners. The Niners would have definitely exposed the Lions' difficulty stopping the run, and Christian McCaffrey would have had 150 yards, and maybe you could have got a turnover from Purdy, but I think that you could have been arguably a favorite against the Buccaneers. You could have been a favorite against the Vikings. Dallas would have been a nice smash mouth kind of football game. So I'm confident. But yeah, this is the tough part, is that there's no real quarterback out there anywhere that says to me, okay, if we get him, that just upgrades from Goff right away, right now in this system. And we'll see what happens. But the Lions' future is bright. I think that now moving forward, the level of optimism that we all see is great. I mean, just take a look at the home and away schedule. There's 10 wins there. There is 10 wins, maybe even 11. So it's going to be full of optimism as we look to the draft. And now we just got to start to see what cuts. The next step will be cuts. Who gets cut? Who ends up being a cap casualty? And then we'll see kind of the financial resources as they start. Right now, they sit about $18 million with cap space, and they can add 20 more by lopping off some high-priced free agents. So it's good times, man. Good time to be a Lions fan. It's optimism, and now the hopium is at a very, very high level, and it's being injected into everybody's veins daily, every single day, day and night, hopium. And boy, this is going to be a wild offseason to pay attention to the Lions, and we'll be here all throughout the entire journey here at the Doc and Jock podcast. Cuz, let's turn our attention real fast to the Detroit Red Wings. I'm curious. It's been an interesting ride in that it's a team that you see the beginning, the sprinkles. I see the seedlings. I'm very happy with what I'm seeing in terms of the development of the young talent. The problem is, at some point, you maybe need a little bit more talent at certain spots because, for whatever reason, at times, the level of play dips to where the defense takes a complete shit against the Colorado Avalanche. The last game that they win, it was wild. They get down in deficits and they play, at a level that's beneath them. Now, their top-end level is good enough to beat the top-end teams in the league. Like anything else, your goaltending behind number one is not the best, and you realize, okay, it's a young team that's been besieged by injuries, and now you're getting some players back, but it takes time to build that chemistry. But overall, the picture with the Red Wings is bright. You see some offensive creativity. You see improved play in special teams. You see the defense kind of formulating their philosophy of toughness and not making mistakes, taking a lot of risk out of the game, being more fundamentally sound. Problem is, basically all these young players are babies, all inexperienced, all under 23, that there are now other teams that have fully matured players that take advantage physically of the wings, forcing turnovers, inopportune situations. And I say, okay, I'm happy year one. I can see at least the vision of Lalonde and what he's trying to do. But the biggest question mark is Stevie Y playing with fire a little bit? I think he kind of seems smart enough to realize which players to try and push through waivers so they can stay in the minors. Verana was interesting, but that worked. And Nedeljkovic, that was a little more interesting to see, a goaltender being put on waivers. But I think that when you look at it, I think Stevie knows that, look, across the league, who's going to want to take a struggling goaltender that's in someone's system and then have to guarantee their salary? So I think he's doing it as a great way to potentially have the roster flexibility that you need to be able to put players in the minors. And I like his strategy. So far for me, there hasn't been too many moves where I'm going, okay, I don't understand. I may disagree with it, but there aren't too many moves in terms of what Steve Yzerman's doing that I say I would not have done it.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is, we talk about a cultural shift with the Detroit Lions. I think they're trying to establish that with the Detroit Red Wings. They're trying to play in the image and the make that Steve Yzerman wants this team to play with. They're basically sending a message to different guys on this team. I think that's part of the reason why Vrana's not here. It's part of the reason why Nedeljkovic isn't here. It's why both of them are in Grand Rapids. And the weird thing is, even in Grand Rapids, these guys are getting scratched, which is sending a bit of a message, I believe. Now, we've seen Steve Yzerman do this before. We've seen him do this in Tampa Bay. I want to say it was with Jonathan Drouin. Jonathan Drouin was a very young, flashy player, and he was so offensively gifted, kind of lacked on the defensive side of the puck. And what happened was Steve Yzerman basically sent him to the minors. Jonathan Drouin demanded a trade, said, trade me. I don't want to be here. I don't want to play for you. I don't want to play for this organization. Steve Yzerman said, okay, cool. Well, then don't play. We're not trading you. You can stay here. And I think he taught Jonathan Drouin a really hard lesson. And Jonathan Drouin, a few years later, ends up becoming a very important part of that Tampa Bay team. I think that might be what is going on here with Vrana, what might be going on here with Nedeljkovic. I think Nedeljkovic is just a little bit off of his game. I don't think he's been playing very well. I think it might be a little bit more between the ears, and he might have to go get some confidence. That's why they sent him to Grand Rapids. But you're right. He's playing a very dangerous game by putting these starters, guys who can start in the NHL, on waivers and sending them to the minors, where other teams, he's basically opening them up and saying, hey, if you want them, come get them. And the weird thing is, people around the league are like, no, we're good. We don't want them. So it really feels like there might be a book that is out on at least both of these two players that we just aren't seeing. But I think when it all comes down to it, Steve Yzerman and Derek Lalonde have an idea of what they want the image of this team to look like. They have a style of play that they want these guys to emulate. They have responsibilities for every position. And if you're not going to fall in line with any of that, and you're not going to be responsible, and you're not going to do what is being asked of you, it doesn't matter if it cuts into your points. If you're not going to play within the team structure, you're not going to be here. And I think that is what the message is, and that's what they are sending by sending a guy like Jacob Vrana down, sending a guy like Alex Nedeljkovic down. I think that is kind of the direction that we're going. And believe me, and you should understand this, Steve Yzerman had to kind of learn this the hard way himself. When Scotty Bowman came in, Scotty said, look, you're going to be more defensive-minded. You're going to play a greater role on the defensive end of the ice. Yeah, I understand that you regularly have 115 points every single season. You are generally in the top 5, top 10 for goals every single year. What has that got you? What have you won? Steve Yzerman was like, we haven't really won anything. He was like, exactly. So get in line. You're going to play more defense. And it was hard for Steve Yzerman initially. It was really difficult for him. It was more difficult for a guy like Sergei Fedorov. They had Sergei Fedorov essentially playing defense a lot of the times under Scotty Bowman because he was just so damn good and he could move the puck up. And it's all about playing in that system. You're going to sacrifice some of your offense to get better on defense, to control the puck, possess the puck, move it up as a unit, and basically choke the life out of guys. And I think that is what Steve Yzerman is trying to do here. If you look at what Tampa Bay did under Steve Yzerman, something very similar. They had a really good defense. They had a defense that was going to possess the puck, a defense that was going to smash guys when they got the puck into their zone, and then they had guys on offense who were just so prolific. Steven Stamkos could legitimately be a 60 goal scorer every single season. Steven Stamkos under Steve Yzerman wasn't really that. He wasn't that every single year. He produced, he put goals on the board, and he had great games. But there was a level of responsibility that came with his position, that came with him playing that outstanding forward position. You sometimes have to dial back what you can do offensively and sacrifice that for the betterment of the team and play a little bit more of a defensive game. And I think, look, nobody really knows what the hell's going on with Vrana. But my outlook from the outside, I think it is a message is being sent to him. It's kind of weird, though, because it all lines up with him going into the NHL's assistance program. So whether it would be something mental, whether it be a substance abuse issue, not really sure. The conditioning stint when he was down in Grand Rapids was supposed to kind of help him get better so he could come back up. It didn't go as planned, and the Wings had to make a bit of a decision. I mean, I think it's kind of telling that they're going to bring a guy like Robbie Fabry up before they're going to bring a guy like Jacob Vrana up. You know what I'm saying? Like Robbie Fabry, as good as he is, he's not Jacob Vrana. Like Jacob Vrana scores with the best of them. If you look at his ice time compared to his goal production, it's basically in line with a guy like Austin Matthews, who is face of the NHL. You know, he's a guy. Like, he's a dude. We always talk about having a dude. Like, Austin Matthews is a dude. I know he's a kind of a weird-looking dude with his mustache usually, but he's a dude. Vrana's basically in line with him if you look at ice time and production on that ice time. Robbie Fabry is not Austin Matthews, but he plays a role on this team. And I think it's more a political thing within the organization, and it's more a teaching and learning moment for a guy like Vrana. And I think as far as Nedeljkovic goes, it's basically you need to get your game figured out, because what you're giving us right now is the absolute shits, and it's just not working. So I find it to be interesting, but I think bigger picture, the Red Wings are trying to cultivate that culture and trying to cultivate that identity, and I think that is the reason for all of this. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's a really good thing. The Red Wings are anywhere from 7 to 10 points out of a playoff spot. Like, they're on the graphic. This year, I don't know if we were expecting them to be on the graphic. I don't know if we were expecting them to even be in contention for a playoff spot. But halfway through the season, this team is there, and they are kind of nipping at that final playoff seed. So there's a lot of good things that you can take out of it, and there's a lot of good things that they're kind of building towards. You just got to kind of wait and see how this all pans out. Again, I still think they're maybe a year or two away. I think this season has been really, really insightful. I think there's been a lot of good things that you can take out of it, but I still think they're a little bit away. They're not where they need to be competing with some of the more upper echelon teams.
Yeah, because outside of the Tigers, the general managers in town seem to be at least established, respected, and moving through rebuilds in a patient way, which we really haven't seen. Obviously, the Tigers' first attempt at a rebuild with Al Avila was a disaster, but now you have this baseball mind. You have Steve Yzerman, you have Brad Holmes, Troy Weaver, and you realize, okay, things are moving slowly, but ever so slightly in a positive direction. Youth, drafting, getting talent, and leadership at the right spots. You got to remember, the Red Wings roster is very young, and when these guys in 4 more seasons get to that age of between 28 and 32, then you can add to it. And now not only do you get success in the short term, but you get success, a certain level of success in the long term. And, we'll end with this. Ken Holland, maybe, when he said on the airwaves, on the radio, that it takes 10 years to rebuild, I think that, we all laughed him out of the building because of sports. But it may take 10 years to actually get the cup. It shouldn't take 10 years to rebuild, but it should take maybe 5 years to get the talent, and then you got to go through the process of the playoffs. They all got to ripen together, and then from the ages of 27 to 31, you got to pick and choose your situation. So maybe Ken Holland was right. It takes time, and right now Steve Yzerman is working his way positively through a rebuild, and we'll keep checking in here at Doc and Jock and the Detroit Sports Podcast. If you've agreed or disagreed with anything that Adam said, regarding the Lions or the Red Wings or myself, hit us up on Twitter at Detroit Podcast, at Adam R. STROZ, and let's debate it. Let's see what you think about the Red Wings. Should they be in the playoff mix a little bit faster? Is Lalone just a nicer version of Jeff Blashill? Let us know. I think that there's a lot of positivity in Detroit sports, but if you disagree, hit us up. Anywhere that you listen to your favorite audio broadcast, type in Detroit Sports Podcast, and our content will find you. And you can listen to daily audio regarding the Wings, Lions, interviews, and the world, and breaking down the world of professional wrestling. Because it's a good time for the offseason. Let's keep it moving, and let's keep hoping that the building process turns out to be fruitful, because when you build through the draft, it's high risk, but a lot of these teams are doing it, and we'll be here on the Detroit Sports Podcast breaking it all down. See everybody next week.